This is a participatory science webinar called Sailing into the Spotlight. And because it's participatory, we're going to ask you right off the bat to participate. If you could please, in the chat, share your name, where you're coming from today, and when the last time you saw a Velella was, or a most interesting time, or if you have never seen one, please enter that in the chat as well, because absence data is still data. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you today. We're super excited about this flash mob style webinar. We had a meeting last week, 6 days ago, and we thought, gosh, this is such exciting information. We have to share it with somebody. Let's do a webinar. And so here we are 6 days later, and we're really excited to see all of the interest that such a short lead up actually promoted. So we're super excited to be here today. Um, in the top corner of my screen, you'll see a QR code, and we can also drop the link. If you don't use QR codes, we could drop the link into the chat, um, so that you can access the Wakelet. And what a Wakelet is it's like a um, virtual file cabinet. And let me see if I can access it here. Um, so here's our Wakelet. We have 3 columns. On the left column, you'll see our panelists' web pages. And down at the bottom of the left column is the slide for this presentation. So if you want to access any of the links, or if you want to review some information that we've already passed through, you can access the slide by selecting this slide icon here. In the center column, there's research and information specific to Velella Velella. And then in the right column, we're going to add any resources that you want to share with us, because again, this is participatory science and we have some heavy hitting folks out there in the audience today. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to share, and definitely want to hear your questions. So as the webinar progresses, it's a short hour, so we don't have a lot of time to stop and pause for questions. Put your questions in the chat and we'll gather them up, and at the end of the webinar, we'll answer your questions if we can, or at least talk about them. All right, so let's get into the webinar. I'll put it back in slideshow mode. So today you're here for Sailing into the Spotlight, how participatory science helps us better understand Velella Velella, or by the wind sailors, with Tom Iwanicki and Dr. Tom Iwanicki and Dr. Hannah Epstein. Again, if you just joined us in the chat, please type in your name, where you hail from today, and when the last time you saw a Velella Velella was. If you haven't seen one, let us know that too. So Oregon Shores is a nonprofit founded in 1971 after the 1967 beach bill passed in Oregon, establishing open public access to Oregon shorelines. CoastWatch is one of our programs, and the CoastWatch program is where people can adopt a mile of the Oregon coast and record their observations. Over the past 30 years, we've been compiling the data from these observations. And last week, we dove deep into looking at the data as it relates to Velella Velella. And Dr. Epstein will be speaking a little bit about that. And this slide in the top left-hand corner has 3 Velella Velella that Garrick Shermer of Kiwanda Beach took a picture of. He's a coast watcher and filed a report on a massive Velella Velella wash up in Kiwanda Beach last year. And that's one of his pictures. And then diagonal from his picture is a picture by Michelle Schwegman that was taken January this year, where she spotted her first Velella Velella of the year. And that was on, I believe, in Cannon Beach. Um, so there's some examples of how our coast watchers are recording phenomena along the Oregon coast. And today you'll learn about how scientists can use this data to help inform their research. If you're interested in the Coast Watch program, there's a QR code to learn more, and we can drop the link to the Coast Watch program in the chat. When coast watchers file their reports, they often have other interests, and many of them use protocols from other programs, such as the Oregon King Tides Project, where they take pictures of the king tides, and the Coast Beached Bird Surveys, where they collect data about beach birds. Those are just a couple of the many citizen science and community science projects that are available to all of you and coast watchers to use. I am going to share a little bit more information about how to support Coast Watch at the end of the webinar. But now I'd like to um, stop sharing and allow Dr. Epstein to introduce. She is our coastal marine conservation manager at Oregon Shores, and I'm going to give her the opportunity to talk a little bit about herself and Dr. Iwanicki.
Hi, everybody. Can you see my screen all right? All right. So, as Denise said, my name is Hannah Epstein. I'm the Marine Conservation Manager for Oregon Shores. I am just so excited that we're all here today to learn more about by the wind sailors and how your work as the eyes on the coast can really contribute to scientific discovery. So as Denise mentioned, we're joined today by Dr. Tom Iwanicki, a David H. Smith Conservation Research Fellow in the Earth Commons Institute at Georgetown University. And he's joining us all the way from Washington, D.C. So we appreciate your availability for us to have a lunchtime opportunity to learn over on the West Coast. Now, we were going to be joined by Dr. Rebecca Helm, who is our second expert today. She was unable to join us, but I wanted to keep her information here just in case you want to find out a little bit more about Rebecca's lab, the work that she does, and her team at Georgetown. So please go to her webpage at helmlab.org. I think we've also put links to her webpage and Dr. Iwanicki's in our Wakelet, so you can check it out there. But I am very excited to introduce you all to Dr. Iwanicki. He is an expert in sensory ecology in what we call the neustonic zone, which is a fancy way to say the layer of the ocean surface. And he's going to be talking a lot more about that for you in a moment. He received his PhD in 2023 from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and has since been rather prolific in his publication of scientific research. At Georgetown, his research into the sea surface is helping to define it as a unique habitat among ocean layers, with unique flora and fauna interacting across the air-sea interface. And that requires distinct conservation policies that are different from other layers in our oceans. This means his work has direct conservation applications in an often overlooked part of our seas. So we're incredibly excited to have him here today to speak with us about by the wind sailors and his work on understanding their global patterns. So I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Let me take over the screen share here. Yeah, and so I am sad that Rebecca can't join us today because she is a bundle of energy, but big shoes to fill. She's getting a emergency dental surgery, so I promise you she would much rather be here. But so here we are. So I'm going to talk today a little bit. I'm going to get on my soapbox about Neuston, and then which is sort of the fancy term for animals at the sea surface, and then dive into the by the wind sailors, the star of the show. And then talk about different ways in which we are using community or citizen science to answer these real deep mysteries about these animals that live in this zone. And so this is sort of my plug of Neuston broadly. This picture here shows in the sort of dashed blue box the sort of focal Neuston animals that live right at the air-sea interface, and they sort of drift by the wind and waves and sort of are completely at the mercy of external forces, and they are preyed upon by animals residing both above and below the water surface, including seabirds, fishes, turtles. And so we're just generally fascinated in all these weird, blue, beautiful creatures floating at the sea surface. But as I mentioned, the star of our show today is the by the wind sailor that graces your shores in abundance seasonally. And one of the most fascinating things about the by the wind sailor is they come in this what's called dimorphic or asymmetrical morph. And so they have that stiff, rigid upper sail that can either be pointed up and to the left, or they also come in a righty form, up and to the right. And so this is shown here with the little mirrored image here. And so this question of handedness of nature has really puzzled and fascinated biologists and naturalists for centuries. There's handedness in horses. Horses have a preferred hoof. We have handedness. There's handedness in crabs, the spiraling of snails. And so this is this really prolific, prevalent phenomenon. But the cause and consequence of handedness is just sort of this large open question in a lot of systems. And so that's where the by the wind sailor comes in with that sort of dimorphic sail, the lefties and righties, as it were. And so this sort of generated the observations of the two different forms of the sails for by the wind sailors was first recorded in sort of the written literature in the 1800s. And then there was some talk about like, are these two different species? What is the outcome of this trait? And in the 50s and 60s, a Soviet scientist, A.I. Savilov, predicted that the wind direction that is prevailing on the ocean surface sort of does a wind sorting mechanism with the lefties going to the left of the wind and righties going to the right. And he postulated that this may relate to where they go in the ocean. And so if you were to think that by the wind sailors were sort of randomly scattered around the globe, you might, if you were to sample comprehensively everywhere along the sea surface, you might see sort of lefties and righties representing sort of blue and red, sort of scattered throughout the planet. But Savilov, being a good oceanographer, he knew that the sea surface is not this uniform mass, and neither are the by the wind sailors because they move differently based on the wind. And so prevailing winds, and you may have heard the like gyres or the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is sort of colloquially named a large gyre in the Pacific Ocean. These are just swirling masses, largely based on sort of the rotation of the planet and prevailing winds. And so Savilov predicted that lefties moving left of the wind on these like broad scale patterns would, in the northern hemisphere, be pushed outside of those gyres. And in the southern hemisphere, those gyres are actually opposite. And so lefties would get concentrated into the middle. And so what you might see if you were looking and counting Velellas throughout the globe, you might see a distribution of lefties that looks like this. And on the Oregon coast here, you might see a predominance of left-handed Velella. And then the opposite would be true for the righty sailors. And so in the northern hemisphere, righties would get sort of concentrated into the middle of those gyres. And then you might see a pattern like this. And then put together, you would, if Savilov's hypothesis were correct, you would see sort of this distribution if you were able to basically run a whole census of all these animals around the globe. But the sea surface is just remarkably difficult to study. It costs $50,000 a day for some of these big research vessels, and then you're just sampling at one point in time on the sea surface. And so Savilov and others, through their best efforts, they were sampling throughout the globe, but it was just really difficult. They didn't get enough data to really support this prediction. And the trail went cold in somewhere around the 60s. And then that's where we come in. Rebecca and I and our colleagues are sort of breathing new life into studying this neustonic zone and the by the wind sailors in particular. And now we are equipped with this emerging field of community or citizen science, where we have thousands of people around the globe who are walking the beach and seeing this beautiful blue animal and thinking, what is that? And then taking a picture and asking friends. And then, sometimes they'll put it up onto iNaturalist. And so we have sort of tackled this question from multiple angles, including genetics and oceanography, but I'll, for the rest of this talk, just focus only on this one component, which includes the Zooniverse package. And so I trust most of you are probably familiar with iNaturalist. That's people taking photographs of biological specimens and then uploading it to iNaturalist, where it's sort of a community of people will determine what that thing is and gives it sort of a location. There's also a community science platform called Zooniverse, where it sort of gamifies data curation. And so we created the Living Sailor project on Zooniverse, where we took that huge wealth of information from iNaturalist and got volunteers to answer some basic questions about every single iNaturalist observation of a Velella. And so we had them answer in each picture, how many sailors do you see? With some training, we asked them to tell us whether or not they could tell if it was a left or right-handed sailor and whether or not that sailor was dead or alive. And so through this sort of consensus-based approach, we got per iNaturalist observation, we had 6 people answer these questions. And through a bunch of analysis, we were able to determine that if 4 people agreed on any one of these, it basically was 99% accurate that that was a good determination for each of those endpoints. And so this picture here shows one righty that is alive. And so all told, through the Zooniverse project, when we launched it, there were more than 11,000 by the wind sailor observations from around the globe. This map shows sort of where those were. And on Zooniverse, we had more than 1,100 volunteers sign up to Zooniverse and go through all those pictures and answering those questions for us. And from that, we were able to, for more than 6,000 of those iNaturalist observations, we were able to confidently say whether or not that by the wind sailor was a lefty or a righty. And so I'll circle back now to this decades-old hypothesis now by Savilov, where he predicted that if you were to sample along the shoreline, you might see a pattern such as this. And so I have a flair for the dramatic. Drum roll. And what our data actually showed is that, in fact, totally as Savilov predicted, we get way more lefties along the coastline in the northern hemisphere and proportionally more righties in the southern hemisphere. And so through this approach, we were able to use this repository of massive human effort and citizen science to confirm this decades-old hypothesis that through sort of classical oceanographic means was just really quite infeasible to do. And so we're really excited about this work. And so that was just one component. And so if you want to read more about all the other elements that went into this, including some at-sea observations with other community scientists, you can, in that Wakelet, I believe we have a link to this paper as well. But join us in nerding out over the Velella by reading that if you're interested. And so from there, that's just the broad motivation for us just being completely stoked about by the wind sailors. They do really remarkable things. We know very little about them, but through these community-based efforts, we are able to sort of unlock these deep mysteries in species that normally reside way far afield in the high seas, where there is no human, like where most humans will never encounter life on the high seas. And so they come to us on the shoreline through various events of wind, as I'm sure you have all experienced. And yeah, so it's just all really exciting. And now part of the motivation that we're stepping into here is thinking about the Oregon coast as this like truly ideal place to begin to sort of peel at the onion and learn deeper and deeper information about the just general life history of these by-the-wind sailors. And so I'll give you a quick update on where we're at in 2026. So since January 1, since the turn of the year, we have, based on iNaturalist, we have, I believe, 17 iNaturalist observations. There is a singular iNaturalist observation from just south of Astoria there, of a cute little righty in some debris in the rack line, it would appear. But we have 17 observations on iNaturalist spanning the coast from Vancouver Island all the way down through California, ranging in different sizes also. But most of them actually are lefties, as we would predict based on sort of that earlier work. But one really exciting thing, and I hope this isn't blasphemous to do in an Oregon Shores talk, but in Long Beach, in the coast of Washington, a friend and collaborator of ours, Russ Lewis, he's part of the Grassroots Garbage Gang. He does beach cleanups across the entire 25-mile stretch of the Long Beach Peninsula. He sent us on February 13th, just in time for Valentine's Day, a picture of a bunch of righties washing ashore. And so this is a really strange occurrence. It's like only righties are showing up. They're pretty much the first occurrence on on his stretch of shoreline this year. And so he sent this picture to us, and we were just like heart racing, like really excited that righties were showing up and only righties. And so that was all just really quite interesting and strange. And so that's where we're at now. But I'll do a quick flashback to think more about just different ways in which the community science has supported this research. Is that in March of 2025, Russ sent me an email saying, just an update. I found three little by-the-wind sailors in this photo. And I went looking some more, and it was mostly a few righties and some lefties. And then I was like, okay, that's interesting. And so I started packing my bags, getting ready to pop over and visit him and do some sampling. And then a week later, on March 17th, he observed an event where it was just all righties washing ashore. And he says, I've never seen so many righties. And this is a guy who's been on the beach cleaning up debris for 20 years and has had a keen interest in Velella. And he's just like, it's all righties. What the heck is going on? It's topsy-turvy. And so I flew out, and Russ and I basically walked or drove and sampled the entire length of the Long Beach Peninsula, just out of interest of this like really weird event where sort of lefties started appearing, but it was this co-occurrence event where lefties and righties were washing along the shoreline at the same time. And that's quite unusual. And so we decided we're going to start at the south point and work our way up and just count proportionally mile by mile as we went north, and counted righties and lefties. We hopped out of the truck, counted, and then just kept on moving. And it was an entire day's worth of work, but it was really cool to see once we plotted the data that in these like 5 mile bands, this is all super preliminary, but in these 5 mile bands, we were seeing sort of a pulse of these righties showing up in greater proportion. And so that has the wheels turning in our head about what is going on at sea that is sort of sorting these animals. And it's all very exciting, and we are actively working up with this data now. But so that sort of covers the breadth of things that we've done thus far. And now thinking about moving forward, one of the things that we really got excited about was how unique the Oregon coastline is in terms of thinking about the way that the wind and waves interact with that shoreline. It's situated pretty well north and south. So satellite modeling and all these things that oceanographers love to do, it's a lot easier when your axis is sort of north and south. It's just an amazing wonderland of opportunities. And Velella wash ashore in their stinky masses in relatively predictable periods of time. And so one of the things that we're always interested in when there is an occurrence of Velella is thinking about how many there are. We're interested in the size of the Velella, and so if you're unfamiliar with Velella, it's called the polyp form that's on the sea surface. Their actual true jellyfish form is a little medusa. They're constantly shedding these little medusae off the bottom that then go 1,000 meters deep, reproduce somehow, and then come back to the surface. Total black box. We don't know what's going on. But what we're really interested in is when those Velella reach the surface, they're tiny, tiny, like sawdust just about. And so figuring out what sort of life history is going on, when they're reproducing, when they're showing up, are they showing up at early in the season as like large chunkin Velellas, or is it mostly small that grow over time? Interested in the sail direction, time and location. And then other sort of features that we're quite interested in are just like funky observations that naturalists can have when you are boots on the ground looking at the animals that you just really can't experience when you are sort of behind a screen. Like a lot of my work is genetics. I'm just seeing genetic code on the screen. But if you're sitting on the shoreline and then you just see like a bunch of gulls preferentially picking up Velella and slurping them up, that's interesting information to know. And thinking about the ways that these animals that are far flung in the high seas, are they transporting a ton of like important nutrients onto the coastline? And is this sort of an important link in the trophic ecology of the habitat of the Oregon shore? And so, yeah, there's tons of different questions. It's all wide open questions too when it comes to the Neuston and Velella because they're hard to study, but I think opening it up to a whole community of people is really, really a great opportunity to unlock some of these mysteries of these curious blue critters. But yeah, from there, I'll hand this off to Hannah.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to get out on the coast and start trying to look for those righties. It's a good motivation here. So just kind of a background, I guess, for folks. We really connected with Dr. Iwanicki and Dr. Helm to discuss how our CoastWatch data can contribute to some of the global studies that their team has been doing, especially because they've had all of this great experience working with community science data. And they also kind of mentioned to us that the Oregon coast is a little bit of a data gap here. We know a lot about what's going on in Washington. I think there's a fair amount of work that's being done in California, but Oregon is a little bit of that data gap there. And so in talking about that, we kind of took this opportunity to start exploring observations of Velella Velella within our CoastWatch data set already. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to share some of our CoastWatch data on Velella Velella so that you can see today what some of your observations are starting to tell us and where we can kind of go with the CoastWatch data. So for those of you who are Coast Watchers that are in the webinar today, you may already know this, but we actually do not have a category on our survey reports for identifying or counting Velella Velella specifically. So when we're combing through the data set for them, we're relying on your amazing observation skills and frankly, your interest in adding Velella Velella to your CoastWatch notes. So we're incredibly happy that you have been doing that so far. So we ended up taking the entire CoastWatch data set, which started back in 1996, and it consists of a total of 8,808 reports. If I can get the slides to move, there we go. And you can see here that out of all of those total reports, we had 256 mentions of Velella Velella. And don't worry, we searched using all sorts of terms for these animals. So we included things like by the wind sailor, Velella Velella, Velella spelled incorrectly, you name it. So whatever you put them on there as, we hopefully found them. And then from those reports of Velella Velella, we wanted to see how they kind of compared across years to look at what trends we could see in our data. So we plotted their observations according to month. So you can see on the x-axis, here we have from January to December, so that's the same for every one of these boxes. And you can see that the very first mention of Velella Velella in our CoastWatch data was in 2006. So not at the beginning of our CoastWatch program, but that means that we still have 20 years of observational data, which is like pretty incredible. And since 2006, we have consistently seen Velella Velella every year, which is very exciting. So you might notice a couple of things as you're looking at these years. The numbers are a little bit low in the beginning, all the way until about 2014. This could be that maybe folks knew less about them or felt like they didn't need to report them. But then once we hit 2014, we start to see more consistent, higher numbers of observations, except for 2020, 2021, and 2022, which is likely impacted by access to the coastline because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what you can see in some of these other years here is that we get these kind of interesting peaks that are happening in the springtime, right? Sometime between March and May or June. So, oh, and then here we can actually see our one observation that we had in January of this year, which is very exciting. So we'll keep updating this as the months continue. So here we're looking at the kind of average observations that we take over the whole year. So this is across our entire data set, so all 20 years. And you can see January through December here on the x-axis. And it's pretty obvious to see that we're getting a seasonal pattern here. We see a very strong peak between March and May, the highest observations being in April. So this seasonal pattern, as Dr. Iwanicki was talking about, is pretty expected, right? And probably for those of you who've had eyes on the coast for so many years, you know that they kind of come around in one area. But the first thing is that it's good to see our data are following this trend. That means we're taking good data. And also, because it's the only long-term data set we have of Velella Velella, it's so important for filling those data gaps and understanding kind of how the peak abundance happens in Oregon and how that might differ from the peak abundances we might see in Washington or in California. You know, we might be looking at temporal trends, how the different peaks in different areas might go, you know, from north to south, or, you know, just in terms of like the timing that we see these peaks coming up. So on average in April, which is the month with the highest observations, about a quarter of all of our reports every April have recorded observations of Velella Velella. So as we kind of come into the spring, you will be seeing them. They're here, we have been seeing them, and you guys have been writing about them, which has been really great. So the final little piece of data that I have for you with the CoastWatch observations is this kind of ridiculous little map here that I put together. I wanted to show that we aren't just seeing Velella in one place along our coast. We're seeing them everywhere. So what we're looking at are the observations of Velella from north to south. So up here is the top, the Columbia Spit at mile 340, all the way down to the California border at mile 0. And these bars along here basically are referring to our observations over time. So the longer the bars are, the more observations of Velella Velella that we see in this area. I've also added these little arrows to the map just so you can kind of see where they line up. It's not perfect, but just to kind of visualize where exactly we're seeing these. I think what's interesting about this is that we see a pattern we were not really expecting. We see the highest observations of Velella in the central to the north coast here. And we see our lowest observations in the south coast. So this could be for a number of different reasons that we are still searching for and trying to figure out and how to work out. For instance, it could depend on the structure of the beach area, right? Whether it's a rocky shoreline or whether it's a sandy beach. We often see a lot of the Velella washing up on sandy beaches. And so it was kind of surprising because the North Coast tends to have a little more rocky beaches than the South Coast does. But maybe we're missing something there. It could also be that maybe more folks are going out to look for them on the North Coast, right? This is something that we'll have to determine. But this is an area that we're really excited to explore. And for those of you who are coast watchers in our audience today, We really encourage you to keep your eyes out for these animals as we come into Velella season. So these are the CoastWatch data I have for you today. Thank you to all of our Coast Watchers for all of your hard work for the past 20 years of at least observing Velella and 30 years of doing CoastWatch. We're still exploring and we will continue to share with you as we explore more about these data. But at the end of this, oh, look at that. I had that on there. What we really want to kind of ask for you is that if you see a by the wind sailor, please report it on your CoastWatch survey. Take photos, share those photos. And if you see a righty, let us know. And I don't know if Dr. Iwanicki wants to pop in, but he has some motivation for you if you
I,
do see a
I,
righty.
I have a shameless plug of swag. Georgetown Earth Common swag we have 3 hats as a little to sweeten the pot as a little giveaway. So the first 3 observations of righty Velella, we will mail you a little Georgetown swag. Thank you.
Good
So
motivation. I'm going to be out there. Um, so yes, please get in touch if you see righties, but definitely put them on those CoastWatch surveys. And then before we get into our questions, I'm going to do some shameless plugging here. A shout out is that we have our Surf and Sun 5K fun run that's happening in Florence on March 21st. Please feel free to sign up. You can find the link at the QR code and other ways to support Oregon Shores. And then I guess with that, we're happy to take questions for Dr. Iwanicki, myself, Denise. If you want to put them in the chat, we can monitor that for now.
I'll start with the first question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
This is Denise. The Linda asked, "Did you say North Coast?" This is kind of a softball question. So I'm taking the softball question, and then I'm going to give the hard question to Dr. Iwanicki. The softball question was, "Did you say North Coast is rockier than the South Coast?" And Linda, we did not say that. We were spitballing. We were last week, 6 days ago, we were all looking at Dr. Epstein's graph of the distribution north to south, and we were just trying to figure it out. So we were just throwing out some crazy, and they were all really crazy ideas of why the spread was the way it was. And I think with this webinar and with further education and engagement and participation, I think we're going to find remarkably different trends, quite possibly. And so I would not say that we said the North Coast was rockier than the South Coast. We were just spitballing some ideas. There's rocky parts of all parts of the Oregon coastline. And we'll save that for another webinar. All right. So the next question is from Joanne in Brookings. She is our participant on the south end of Brookings. So speaking of geographic distribution, our geographic distribution of this webinar is absolutely fantastic. We've got people from all up and down the coast, from Joanne, who popped a question into the chat in Brookings, all the way up to Lisa in Cannon Beach. So we've got, and it's a very diverse, very spread out group of participants today. So I'm really excited about that. Joanne asked, and please, everybody else, feel free to pop questions or resources that you want to see added to the Wakelet into the chat. Joanne asked, how can I tell if they are alive? Is the sail standing upright or what?
Yeah, so alive is a bit ambiguous once they're washing ashore. It tends to be pretty terminal for them regardless, but the freshest Velella that most recently have washed ashore will be sort of this bright, either bright or deep indigo blue color, and they will be predominant, like wet, bright. And if you really wanted to like test how healthy they were, you can put them in a container of water and see if they still bud off medusae. And that means that they're still sort of like actively uh, doing reproductive processes. But once they start to decay and are deceased, that pigment will largely go away, and then they're like long dead by the time they look like the sort of clear. They almost like when you pick them up, even they look like almost like plastic trash because the chitin that they have for their float and sail is quite rigid and robust. But yeah, it's mostly based on sort of color, texture, whether or not they're sort of freshly stranded.
Right. Okay. Our next question is from Jennifer. Um, is reporting sightings on iNaturalist sufficient, or is CoastWatch preferred? I'm not familiar with CoastWatch. Can I just go to the website and submit a report? So I'm going to start with the CoastWatch question. CoastWatch is a community science program with Oregon Shores, and we can drop the link to join CoastWatch into the chat. It's also available on the Wakelet. And anyone can do that. And all we ask is that you monitor your mile of the beach once every 3 months. And when you register for the program with us, we'll train you on the Coastwatch protocol. And that's all you need to do. And once you've done that, then yes, all you need to do is go to the website and submit a report. Once you've been trained in Coastwatch, you can submit a report for your mile of beach and for other miles of beaches. So I guess where is the best? And with Coastwatch, many Coast Watchers also report on iNaturalist. So it's very, very common for a Coast Watcher to also be submitting iNaturalist reports. iNaturalist doesn't have absence data, but CoastWatch does. So that's one reason why I encourage you to sign up for CoastWatch if you aren't already a Coast Watcher. But I'll let Tom or Dr. Iwanicki and Dr. Epstein chime in as to where they would like to see this data reported.
Yeah, I think it takes all sorts. What level of commitment you're willing and able to put forward in sort of studying the by the wind sailors. So even if you just are on the Oregon coast occasionally for vacation or recreating and you see a Velella and you take a picture of it, definitely I would say if you have a photo of the Velella, put it on iNaturalist. That's a pretty light lift. And from those photos, uh, typically it can be helpful if the photo, in terms of like thinking about uh, whether or not they're alive or dead, and whether or not how big they are, and if they're lefty or righty. If you get a good picture of the sail up and down, and then even another sort of best practice that I tend to do whenever I take iNaturalist photos is putting something of a known scale. So like chucking a penny in the photo or something. So then if someone were interested in seeing how big that by the wind sailor was, they could take that photo, measure the size of a penny, which has a known size, and then measure the size of the by the wind sailor. Um, but yeah, so iNaturalist is always great. We would probably treat iNaturalist and CoastWatch as sort of distinct entities. And CoastWatch, this is like one of the things that we're super excited about is like this conversation is just only weeks old, and there's already a lot of interest and excitement and the wealth of data that you already have from 20, 30 years from CoastWatch without being like pushed to talk about Velella. And now here we are. But as Denise mentioned, the absence data is really lacking on iNaturalist because you can't go to iNaturalist and say, I didn't see a Velella that day. They only want photos of things that are living. And so through the Coast Watch, that's really helpful in that if you've gone to your stretch of beach and you looked for Velella, you could put no Velella, and that gives us absence data as well, which is really important for knowing like when the arrival times of these animals are. But yeah, Hannah, do you have want to riff off of that at all?
Yeah, just to second that, that it's kind of a both opportunity, especially, Coast Watchers at the moment, the program, we only go out once every 3 months. So it's really great to have that iNaturalist opportunity to upload photos as well as you see them. I will also take this opportunity while I'm unmuted to allow Kara Gates to ask a question. She wants to be unmuted, so I'm just going to do that for a second. If I can find there. There you go, Kara. Kara, I'm not sure we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Um, I had a question for Dr. Iwanicki. So I really informally heard this theory of global distribution patterns apply to shoes, as in you'll tend to find more left shoes on the Northern Hemisphere. And I heard this when I was doing a field season in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, where there were like mass amounts of marine debris that would wash up. And we all started seeing left shoes everywhere, but I don't know if that was our own bias that we were searching for that. So I'm just curious if this same theory applies to objects that have that left or right shape to it, I guess.
That is one that I haven't heard before. I'll admit I've been in the Neuston game for I'd say 2.5 years now. That would be a great. I'm gonna ask Rebecca about that, what she knows. She's been at it much longer than I have, and that's one of our collaborators at University of Hawaii, Nikolai Maximenko. He was our sea surface modeler. Like he is a whiz at just running these massive models. He could probably take the shape of a shoe and know what sort of movement it would do and then see where it would go. But yeah, that's a fascinating question. That would be wild.
Yeah, I've been very curious if there was any truth to that. But thank you for the
Yeah,
fascinating talk.
yeah, I'm sure Rebecca has probably heard of something like that. I'll ping her.
Cool, thanks.
There was also Joanne asked a question about how you can tell if they're lefties or righties. So the by the wind sailor are oblong, so there's sort of this like oval shape, and the sail itself is either up into the left or up and to the right. And so you can kind of think of it as a clock face. And so no matter where you like rotate it, that shape, as long as you are situating it up and down, that's going to remain the same. That does get tricky though when they are sort of in the process of decaying, and you can get a photo of a by the wind sailor that is like slightly transparent, and you don't know whether or not it's upside down or right side up. And so if you have in your perspective, I guess that would be a left sail. But if you don't know if it's the sail on here or the sail on here, but actually opposite, there's some like mirroring going on. But yeah, there's within the wakelet, there is uh, pictures that sort of show the direction of the sail for lefties and righties.
All right, Susan Hogg. At one time, it was possible to file a dispatch report, which was just a note with the date, the mile, and the reason for the dispatch. I walk on more beaches than my mile, but uh, I'm unlikely to file a report. Um, Now I've just lost it. Where did it go? So the question is, how can we file a report every time I walk on a beach? Could the dispatch be created again so it'd be easy to say I walked part of mile X afternoon of Y date and saw many Velella. I checked with a few, and they appear to be righties and lefties. Absolutely, Susan, that's a great idea. You do not need to file a dispatch report, even if it's not your mile. It's okay to file a report on somebody else's mile. being exclusive about miles anymore. So you can always file a report on someone else's mile, and you can skip all of the entries and just go to the most relevant information. So just go to the wildlife sightings section and go to the comments on the wildlife sections and click the other box and put in Velella Velella. And yes, if you can identify them as a righty and you're one of the first, you might find a Georgetown University hat in your mailbox. So, so yeah, definitely. You can file reports on any mile of the Oregon coast, and I encourage you to do so.
Uh, Kristen asked a question in the Q&A. I just realized that there's a separate Q&A and chat. Sort of a multifaceted question just about their life history and the animals themselves. So what kind of creature are they? In what family? Do they have a face? Do they breathe? What do they eat? It's hard to imagine that they're alive. So by the wind sailor are a cnidarian, so they're distantly related to coral. There are two other Neuston that are more closely related to them. There's the sort of infamous by the wind or infamous Portuguese man o' war that is or blue bottle that are the air-filled sac with really long stingy tentacles. And so the Portuguese man o' war also interestingly have a lefty and righty form and they have really long tails, but they're actually able to sort of change with their musculature the shape of that bubble to actually sort of actively keep themselves afloat, and that would influence the dynamic of their sailing. Whereas by the wind sailor have a stiff sail that does not sort of change its orientation. They are in the family Porpitidae, and so they're actually sister, or they're relatively closer related to Porpita, which are the blue buttons. And so they're sort of circular shape, and they look basically like a Velella if you flattened the sail, got rid of the sail, and squished them into a circle. Um, and their dynamics are also super interesting. And I could go on about like what we found between Velella and Porpita in the Mediterranean, and it's just like kind of blowing my mind. But so what the by the wind sailors do, they have those short tentacles on the underside that have cnidocysts that are stinging. And so if you're like a small larval fish or a copepod that gets hit by that, that that's sort of what the by the wind sailors do to trap their prey and consume them. So they will sting sort of small crustaceans, small larval fish. Um, they are colonial, sort of this in a somewhat similar way to how corals are colonial. So it isn't one, it's just a large conglomerate of sort of colonies rather than a single sort of interconnected organism. So it doesn't necessarily have a face. They do have a mouth, a central mouth in the bottom of the raft that they'll sort of siphon material to while eating. Um, and then they also have, like corals, an algal endosymbiont. So they have uh, basically a little plant particle in their tissues that absorbs the sunlight and distributes nutrients throughout their body. And so that's also one of the most wild things about animals that live at the air-sea interface is it is an extremely harsh environment in many different ways, but it is super UV rich. And so there has to be like some shielding that they have to do through perhaps that blue pigmentation to almost like create a sunscreen so they don't get a ton of DNA damage as well. But they subsequently also harness that sunlight through those algae in their tissues. But yeah, very much alive and very, very funky and weird for sure. I wish they had a face. Oh, someone just signed up to adopt a mile. Woo!
Woo! Great.
Maybe
That was
Jennifer
a
will be the first righty find. Daily beach walker. That's a pretty good odds.
super. Those were really great questions, everybody. You got about 5 seconds more to pop another question in the chat. Really fantastic information. I've always been so excited about Velella Velella, and I've learned a lot. I had some misconceptions, I'm super happy to have been able to ride this wave, catch this sail, and catch the wind, and learn from you today. It's really been a great webinar.
Yeah, yeah. When I saw Hannah's data, I got chicken skin. I just got so excited without people being told, like, look at Velella, they're the best thing on the planet. And you already got a ton of data, a bunch of Velella heads already. So we're all kindred spirits
Exactly.
out here.
Yeah, we are. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Um, we'll share out the recording and the wakelet in our Coast Watch letter, in our next Coast Watch letter. So if you're not a Coast Watcher yet, sign up. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.